So if you like the card game Go Fish, but you're looking for something a little bit more interesting and a little bit more complex, Advanced Go Fish is the card game for you. This is a game my wife Elizabeth and I invented about 6 years ago. And the basic premise is that you're trying to score points by forming pairs or four of a kind. And the game mechanics are very similar to regular Go Fish, except there's some little twists that make the game much more exciting. And so this video is going to walk you through an example of part of a game and go through the rules of how this works. So at the beginning of the game, each player is dealt 7 cards. And face down, just normal way that you would deal out cards. For the sake of this video tutorial, we're going to show the cards face up for all the players. We have 3 players on the board, player 1 on the left, player 2 at the top, and player 3 on the right. And so they've been given 7 cards, and we're just showing you what those cards are for the sake of this video. We said that the youngest player goes first. You can decide this however you want, of course, and you can go in a clockwise fashion. So we're going to say here, player 1 is going to go first, and player 1 is going to start out just like regular Go Fish. He can ask any other player that's playing, for example, player 2. Player 2, do you have any 10s? He's asking that, of course, because he has a 10 himself. And so player 2 looks at his hand and says, no, I don't have any 10s, Go Fish. So Go Fish means, of course, that he's going to draw from the deck. He's going to fish from the deck, player 1 is. So player 1 draws a card from the cards that are remaining in the deck. And in this case, drew a 4 of hearts, and that goes to player 1's hand. And that's now the end of player 1's turn. Player 1 didn't do anything productive. He had to go fish from the deck. Because he fished from the deck, just like in regular Go Fish, his turn is then over. So now it's player 2's turn. And player 2, again, can ask either player 1 or player 3 for any cards that they might have. So he has an ace, and so he's going to say, hey, player 3, do you have any aces? And player 3 does indeed have an ace, right? And so now this is where things get a little bit different compared and more interesting compared to regular Go Fish. Instead of just giving the ace to player 2, player 3 is going to hold up 2 cards. One of them is going to be the ace, and the other one is going to be another card of his choosing in his hand, okay? And so he's going to then present those to player 2 and have player 2 pick one of those 2 cards blindly without seeing them. And so there's some randomness to this, which makes the game much more interesting. And so, for example, he could, he's going to put up that ace. He has to put up that ace as one of the cards, but then any of the other cards, he can choose one of his other cards in his hand to also present that card. So in this case, he chose his 9 of hearts. And so those 2 cards, he's going to not show them to player 2, but he's going to hold them up as shown. Okay, so player 2 correctly guessed that I have an ace. So I'm going to take my ace and add another card of my choosing, a second card that's not an ace, a dummy card. So I'm going to choose this 9 of hearts. So I have my ace of diamonds and my 9 of hearts, and I'm going to just put those up, face away from player 2, and player 2 randomly chooses one, and she correctly got the ace. Okay, so in that case, player 2 correctly got the ace, and so player 2 would then receive that ace, and that goes into his hand, and now player 2 is going to get another turn because they got a pair out of that. They successfully fished for a pair. And this is actually how you score. You score by fishing from another player, not by fishing from the deck. You can only score from fishing from another player. That's one of the things that makes this game interesting. And so player 2 successfully fished from another player for a pair of aces. Though that he gets 1 point for that, and those pair of aces go off of the board. They're removed from play permanently. Okay. Now, player 3 had presented a dummy card, the 9 of hearts, unsuccessfully. Player 2 didn't take that bait or got lucky, right? It was a 50-50 chance. And so that 9 of hearts returns to player 3's hand. All right, so player 2 gets to continue to play because he successfully scored, okay? Because he scored. He has 1 point now. And so player 2 now can ask player 3 or player 1, any player on the board, for another play. So you might say, player 1, do you have any 5s? Well, player 1 does have a 5. So player 1 says, yes, I have 1 5. And so the same sort of procedure happens. Player 1 is now going to present 2 cards without showing what they are to player 2, and player 2 is going to select one of them. And so he selects one of those cards blindly. One of those cards, in this case, he selected the wrong card. He selected the dummy card, not the 5 he was seeking for. And so player 2 gets that wrong card. He gets that 10. It goes into his hand. And so, you have to be a little strategic. Player 1 maybe wanted to get rid of that 10 for some reason. And that was a good strategy to get rid of that 10, right? And he got to keep his 5. And the correct card, which was the 5, goes back to player 1. All right. Player's 2 turn is now over. He didn't score on that turn. He guessed wrong during the fishing. And so now we're going to player 3. Now you'll notice player 3 was dealt a pair of jacks, okay? But he cannot play that pair of jacks. He doesn't get any points for that. And that pair of jack is stuck in his hands. He can try to, get somebody else to take it away from him, or eventually turn it into a 4 of a kind. But pairs can only score if they are made by fishing from other players. So that's very important. So he can't score from that pair of jacks. But anyway, player 3 can now ask someone, this is the beginning of player 3's turn, for a play. So player 1, do you have any 7s, for example? And player 1 doesn't have any 7s, so no, go fish. Player 3 then draws a card. He drew another jack. 3 of a kinds don't mean anything in this game. They're not worth anything. You can't get rid of them. It's only pairs and 4 of a kind. So now it's player 1's turn. So player 1 is going to ask, in this case, player 2, do you have any 8s? And player 2 does have 1 8, right? So he's going to say that. So he's going to present 2 cards. And the 2 cards that he's going to choose one of those cards, player 1 is. In this case, he chose the wrong card. Player 2 chose a queen to be his dummy card. And player 1, 50-50 chance, chose the wrong card, didn't get the 8, but very interestingly, he chose a queen. And so player 1 receives that card. And why the queen is interesting is because player 1 had a queen already in his hand. So player 1 got the wrong card, but he still accidentally fished from another player for a pair. And so that still counts. That's kind of part of the fun of the game. He accidentally got a pair, and so he's still going to receive 1 point for that. And the pair of queens is now off the board again. Anytime you score, those cards go off the board. That 8, which was the other card that player 1 did not choose, returns back to player 2. Okay, and player 1 gets to go again because he scored. So player 1 is going to say, in this case, player 3, do you have any 5s? Okay, player 3 doesn't, so no, go fish. Player 1 draws a card, and player 1 drew a 5. Again, player 1 has a pair now, but he cannot play this. This is not a scoring play because this pair was not fished from another player. So this is similar to player's 3's pair of jacks that he was dealt. It was not fished from another player. That's the only way he can score. And so he has to either try to trade this away, or he has to turn this into a 4 of a kind. Okay. So now it's player two's turn because player one didn't score. He's asked player one, do you have any fives? And player one has 2 5s now, right? And so now, since he has 2 5s, he's not going to put just 2 cards out blindly. He's going to put 4 cards out blindly. And player two is going to select 2 out of the 4 cards blindly. So 4 cards go up from player one's hand. If, for example, he didn't have 4 cards in his hand, he puts up just as many as he has. But in this case, he had more than 4 cards. So he selects 4 cards. 2 of them have to be the 2 5s, right? I mean, there's some honesty in this game that is kind of built in. And player two then picks 2 of those cards. In this case, this example, he picked 1 of the 5s, not both of them, and then an ace dummy card. Both of those cards go to player 2. The remaining 2 cards will go back to player 1. But look what happened. He got 1 5. He didn't get 2 5s. And in fact, if he got 2 5s, then that would have been a 3 of a kind, and he had to have to wait until he gets a 4 of a kind. But he got 1 of the 5s, and so that gave him a pair. And so that he can play. And so he's going to get another point for that. And those go off of the board and are permanently out of play. Okay? The remaining 2 cards that player 2 didn't choose go back to player 1. Okay, so player 2 scored. So player's 2 turn would continue and continue until he stops scoring. And then it would be player 3's turn. But hopefully at this point you get sort of the game mechanics and how this goes. That's the basics. The only additional things are just some scoring rules and some end of play rules that we need to go over. So just to review, players score a pair which is worth 1 point only when it is fished from another player. That's the key. It's only when it's fished from another player, not when it's drawn from the deck and not when it's dealt. For a 4 of a kind, you get 3 points for that. Those go off of the board as well. As soon as you get a 4 of a kind, you play that 4 of a kind, you get 3 points. And those are at any time. You can draw for it, you can fish for it from another player, or if you're really lucky, you could be dealt, although that's going to be very rare, right? And then when fishing from other players, we went over 2 of these scenarios, but let me just read this rule. When fishing from an opponent, the player selects 1 out of 2, 2 out of 4, or 3 out of 6. We didn't do that one. 3 out of 6 cards blindly from the opponent if the opponent has 1, 2, or 3 of the fished cards respectively. So basically, however many cards your opponent has when you're fishing from them, they have to put double that number of cards, okay? And lastly, how the game ends. There's 2 ways the game can end. The most common way is that the game ends when the communal deck is empty. And so when the last person draws the last card, then the game immediately ends. Or if you want, you can choose to play 1 more round of turns after that. Or when one player has no cards left. So if somebody scores all their cards and have no cards left, the game immediately ends, and the player with the most points win. So I hope you enjoy this game called Advanced Go Fish that we invented in 2014. We've had a lot of fun playing it, and this is our first time kind of sharing it with other people.